Welcome to the Elevate Your Equity podcast, where we, as married busy professionals, leverage real estate investing to unlock the 3+1 degrees of freedom: health, location, time, and financial.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Elevate Your Equity podcast. And today we're going to be recapping the episode that we had with Mr. George Roberts. So George Roberts is a bioscientist turned real estate investor full-time recently, and he is an expert in networking, or at least he taught himself how to network. And the reason that we wanted to recap this very important show is that networking is everything, and we're going to get into that as to why. So the first point that we want to recap here is that networking is a must in multifamily. You just can't do it all yourself. In the single family world, absolutely you could. You could property manage, you could find the property, you could get the loans, you could do all of that. And even still, it's a people-based business because you have people living in your units paying you money to rent, all right? And since it's people-based business, you can't do it yourself. You need to make sure that you have a great team and references and resources surrounded around you. And the mechanical way of doing that is by networking and getting to know people. So you have to get that under your head, is that knowing that this is a networking game is super important. And point number 3 that I want to make is that being able to be a good storyteller can help you to become more relatable in all aspects of real estate investing, from underwriting to raising capital, because it's all about influencing people and getting people to understand where you're coming from and be able to relate with your story. So if you're a great storyteller from outside of the real estate realm, then you're going to just crush it in the real estate realm, because there's a lot of ways that you can relate the two together. So I think that point about being a good storyteller is a fantastic way to help build the network in real estate investing.
And then just to move on to the next point, because this is something that I struggle with and I dealt with a lot in my early life, is just how do you overcome shyness when it comes to networking? And what George says is that all it takes is to become curious and intentional, because I think for a lot of us, the word networking can sound a little bit transactional. It's not personal. And it sounds like it's a means to an end. And so it's important to reframe that in terms of, wait a second, I'm just being curious. I just want to learn about other people, and I want to learn about how I can help them. So what he says too is just listen before speaking as much as you can. And really by understanding that everyone is superior to you in some way. You want to expand more on that?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of people forget that everyone has a collection of life experiences and they're an expert in something, right? Mm-hmm. It could be an expert in a video game. It could be an expert in understanding the routes around town in the area that you live, or being an expert in a language or something like that. And so by being curious and intentional, you'll be able to really listen and hone in on what that person is superior to you on. And that means that you can learn something from them. And I think that once you realize that you can learn something from someone, that's where the curiosity and that's where the leaning in starts. And so the sooner that you can identify that, the better.
Mm-hmm. And, this works really well too, where I remember, when we were first starting our journey, stepping into a conference where there were CEOs, executives of multi-million-dollar, even some billion-dollar companies. And me thinking, gosh, well, how do I even begin to quote unquote network with these people where I don't even feel like I have anything to offer? And so again, that same advice about being curious and intentional works so well, because then it helps us to pull ourselves out from feeling inferior to just feeling, hey, I'm so grateful to be in this room, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that it's a point about listening too. If you become curious and intentional, right, and you find out that someone is a master to you in some way, that listening piece attracts others. Because if you're really listening to what people are saying and you're responding to it logically, people really respect that, because people love to be listened to. People love to talk and love to be listened. So all you got to do is be curious. And then as you lean in, so will the other person. And that's how true connections are made. So another tip, which is point number 5 that George had, is use business cards if you have them, if you're going to personal, like to meetups in person with your website, your podcast, or whatever to stand out. So do whatever you can to make it easier for the other person to recognize you later on, right? So if you can stand out, easiest way you can do that is to print out a card that's got a QR code in the back that leads to more information about you. And then encourage them to do that while you are currently with them inside of that meetup, right? Because if you give them a business card, oftentimes the business cards ends up in the trash or on a counter somewhere, and then eventually in the trash. So make sure that you lead to that engagement and you give them that business card once it's relevant, okay? There are a couple other tips, which is point number 7 for us for introverts. So first thing is that he recommended is take a really big, long look at what your life would be like if you branched out, right? And see what the alternative would be if you don't branch out versus if you did, right? And be honest with yourself about this, right? Be honest to say, well, man, is it really worth me getting out of my shell to start talking with people and seeing what they can enable for me and what I can enable for them? Be honest about that fact. What do you think about that introversion tip?
Right. Because, since you're listening to an introvert right now, and it's just so interesting because, if you've read the book Quiet by Susan Cain, you'll know that like introverts, it's not that we're shy or like super introspective, or it's not that primarily, it's just that, we need to recharge. So the whole definition of introversion is like getting out there, putting ourselves out there is actually quite draining. And we need to go back and recharge. And so some people can look completely extroverted, but in reality, afterwards they collapse. They're like, I need to break away. And so extroverts actually get recharged, right, in crowds. And so I just want to make that distinction because oftentimes, again, we associate introversion with just shyness and holding back, but sometimes that's not the case. It takes a lot of energy to put ourselves out there.
Yeah. And I remember George saying too, that it took up a lot of energy for him to go out to the meetups, but when he was able to recognize that the juice is worth the squeeze, he was able to say, okay, I'm introverted, but I know this is good for me. So I'm going to put the energy on to make it worth the while. And of course, I mean, look at how his life has become because of this, and he's worked through it. And ironically, now he looks forward to these meetings where he's able to use his introversion to his advantage. So it's really, really cool. Love this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can see how it can transform in terms of, the energy that it takes, because again, that could be the perspective we hold about ourselves. But then once we're in it and once we practice it, it turns into a muscle, it turns into a habit, and it becomes really fun.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. The other thing that he mentioned too is about being memorable, right? When you're in these networking groups, if you're able to be memorable and you can remember one thing about a person and make a conscious effort to remember names, right? He gave us a quotable quote, which was, if you take an interest in people, you'll find that they're interesting. Okay. And the other thing too, in this point that he was making is that repeat their names in their conversation that you're having when you first met them a few times, right? So, as you're working with them, like make sure that you say their name a few times, because that will help with the link between the name of the person and the face that you're seeing. That way it's more natural, right? And if you're able to find or take something away that's interesting because you're curiously listening and not just waiting to speak, you're actually listening to someone and trying to find out what they're a master in over you, right? So you can learn something. If you can take away one thing, the next time you see them, right, whether it's online or whether it's in person, if you can remember that one thing and say, oh, hey, how are your kids doing? Or how is your investment in Cleveland doing, right? If you can do that, that really makes a really incredible impression, because it tells the other person that you took the time to remember. And that builds relationships, that builds strength right away, builds trust very quickly. And so I think that was a really brilliant tip, is to, in the moment, remember to mention their name and remember one thing about them that really interested you, that you share.
Yeah, that's so good. Another thing, that a key takeaway that I want to mention too, is that when you are, again, quote unquote networker, and you enjoy it and you take a keen interest in other people's stories and other people in general, it's not for selfish reasons. You become a conduit, you become a resource for them, just in the event that other people might be stuck on something. And then you just happen to know the perfect person, the perfect resource for them. And to connect those two, you might just change their life. And so again, networking is not just for us, it's for everyone.
Yeah. Oh man, love it. All right. The last point that I want to make, point 8, is that practice makes perfect. And this is easy to say, but very hard to implement. And if it seems like it's something that's difficult for you to try to, keep sticking with it, just understand that the first time you do something like this, the effort is going to seem massive. The next time that you do it, it's going to be a little bit less, and then a little bit less, and a little bit less. So continue with that long-term outlook that if you practice doing this, you're going to get way better, and it's going to become more effortless and easier, and you're going to start reaping the rewards to kingdom come. So it's really great. Make sure that you remember to be an intentional practicer of being a practice makes perfect person. Keep attending the meetups, keep going, maybe start with doing some virtual ones first and then going to in-person once you get the hang of it. But highly recommend you do it. It is much easier in person, by the way, because the connection is just more innate and it's just more natural. Those are our tips for networking. Yeah, that's what I think. This was a great show, had a lot of great points and takeaways about why this is important and how to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, subscribe, and engage with us. And keep in mind too, that we have an open mastermind group every Wednesday on our Facebook group, and everyone can get in. You just type in the Elevate Equity Tribe in the search bar in Facebook, and you can find us there. And we'll look forward to seeing you there to tackle some of the coolest stuff that we're seeing and have some great guests on. We're looking forward to seeing you there. For the time being, that's all that we have until next week. So this is Derek.
And this is Sophie.
We are signing off. Take care, everyone.